Thanks for joining me here for the Daily Bread Bible Study. This is day 184 for Thursday, July 2nd, 2020, focusing on Proverbs 12 through 14. There's a lot of self-awareness pieces here for today, and my hope is that this will be nurturing and helpful for you in your life. So in Proverbs 12, 15 through 16, we start out with some common sense. Fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to advice. Fools show their anger at once, but the prudent ignore an insult. So I see this as a bit of self-awareness, the more that we are self-aware and realizing that we all are growing in some ways, then we can learn to be benefit from advice, and also realize our own imperfections as well too. We counter imperfections within ourselves with some self-gratitude, and that can help us be resilient in the midst of insults. So instead of being reactive when somebody demeans you or brings you down, when somebody tries to hurt you, you can say, I'm a beloved child of God with whom God is well pleased. I am a worthwhile individual that you should get to know, and I have worth within myself, away from your assessments of the way I should be or the way that I am. And so that these resilience pieces can help us just be able to listen, and instead of hearing anger from somebody else, we can see that person's deep need being expressed, and also we can see somebody who insults us realizing that they're just speaking out of their own unhappiness themselves. So along with that, in Proverbs 12:25, it says, anxiety weighs down the human heart, but a good word cheers it up. So I studied Greek, and one of the things that I love is finding words. Originally this is in Hebrew, but we have the Greek Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. And here in these words, we have good words referenced, which makes me think of the word eulogy. The word eulogy is a combination that just means good words. It literally means good words. So eulogy for us is usually given at the time of death, but even more than being sobering words, I think we're taught to be able to articulate people's lives and speak of the good things about others. In our life, right, anxiety can take a hold of us. It has for my family. I think especially about childbearing, as we are currently in the time where we're expecting our third baby coming December 25th. Yeah, Christmas Day for us. So we're very much excited for our growing family and for the blessings that come with that. But there's also responsibility and anxiety, worrying about how to take care of our children even as they are unborn yet. So with our oldest son, Joel, we were told by the doctor that his femur was short and that he was not growing normally, and this created all sorts of anxiety for us. Now with Joel turned out to be fine and healthy and well, and we love him, and I'm glad that he is healthy and growing and just normal. With this beloved unborn child that we have, code name Arpashad is what we've given to child number 3. I look forward to actually speaking your real name later on, but the doctor continues to give us worries and to be cautious, especially in the pandemic called COVID-19, and has said that this could cause a miscarriage in my wife Amanda if she contracts COVID. So there's all sorts of reasons that anxiety can weigh us down, but it's helpful to remember this. There are things that we can control, and there are things that we cannot control. And we'll do our best with the things that we can control. Here in the pandemic, it's wearing a mask. It's trying to be, practice social distancing, which I just like to say physical distancing. It's It's not really that we're avoiding people or interacting. Like we try and do that mediated through technology. But it's about not putting yourself at risk and others at risk by potentially, exposing people to, this virus. And so just do what you can control and then leave the rest up to God. Moving on to Proverbs chapter 13, I have selected verse 3, which says, "Those who guard their mouths preserve their lives. Those who open wide their mouths come to ruin." Now, you could take this a couple different ways, but I'd like to focus on relationships and the way that when we speak words in relationships, that they have very much profound meaning and impact. And when we say things out of anger and frustration, that we got to be very careful about what we say and how it comes across. So really, have you been there? Have you said something that you regret later when you were angry? Has it changed a relationship that you appreciated and valued, but changed it for the worse? Well, if you're like me, of course you have, right? The challenge with that is less, I think, with people who are resilient and people who are forgiving. I've said plenty of things to my wife which I regret, and I'm glad that she's been forgiving and understanding and patient with me. But, especially people who are seeking and not at peace within themselves, you say the wrong thing, and that could trigger them, right? People can be vengeful and aggressive when their needs are not met, when they are unhappy with themselves, when they feel shamed by someone else. And sadly, there is a lot of this in our world, right? Even within our own church communities, this happens rather frequently. And so that reconciliation involves letting go of grudges, but also being very careful for what we say, especially when we see a challenge in somebody else. So I'd just like to say this as well too. If you've been hurt by anybody in the church, having unguarded words, saying something that felt very shaming to you, my sympathies and heart goes out to you. That happens often, and sadly, I think that drives people away from church. Fortunately, I don't think that's what the message that God has for us. I think reconciliation is possible in certain circumstances. I'm not telling you, to go and be reconciled to a church that's been abusive towards you, but just to say that, I think when we live in harmony and we seek to, provide healing and wholeness, I think that's essentially the message that I preach. You're a beloved child of God with whom God is well pleased. You're imperfect, but you're beloved. So your mistakes that you make are your own, and you'll have to live with consequences of them. But know that that doesn't make you unworthy of being in relationship and connection with others, especially not within the church. So my heart goes out to anybody who's been hurt in that way. Now moving on to Proverbs 13, verse 11. It says, "Wealth hastily gotten will dwindle, but those who gather little by little will increase." We all want our needs taken care of. We want to have a little bit extra to be able to take care of emergency situations and to grow our wealth to be able to enjoy the things that we find, thrilling and exciting and joyful in life. But along with that comes the responsibility of knowing how to manage wealth. And here it's indicating that knowing how to manage wealth is even more valuable than having the wealth yourself. If you know how to acquire wealth and manage it and slowly, little over time, save away and be able to invest that in things that will appreciate in value versus depreciate in value, you'll be able to, find that you have what you need and more. I think, specifically of, a story I've heard of a child whose parents set up an inheritance and even a trust fund. And this child did not lack for money, for resources, but yet feeling that they never quite learned how to manage money and never, seeking to do that, they essentially squandered the wealth and the resources because they just didn't know how to manage it for themselves. A lot of people tried to help them out, but it just never came to self-sufficiency in that way. So these things happen, but God still loves you. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Those who spare the rod hate their children, but those who love them are diligent to discipline them." This verse has been used by a lot of individuals to say that corporal punishment, physical punishment for children, hitting children, is a positive thing. It is something that can be done. And I believe corporal punishment does have its place, but it's really not meant to be the first option, for children, especially because children are very sensitive to, how they are touched, if they're touched in a loving manner or touched in a, aggressive kind of negative manner. And so I think, it just illustrates the challenge of parenting, that you're called to establish clear boundaries and set up clear consequences for those actions, really so that the children are able to, be self-disciplined and, correct themselves, to know when they should go across a boundary or when they really shouldn't, and to help, have that distinction. So as a parent, you're called to do that in a loving way, to help them understand the boundaries and the consequences that come with that. And as a child, you want to help, learn the importance of self-discipline and correction. I will say this is, again, not condoning abuse. Abuse is never okay, especially for children. I will also acknowledge this too. No parent is perfect. You can always change your parenting style. You can change, if you use physical punishment or, something like grounding or, other forms of a consequence that is more kind of self-induced. As long as you hold to that consequence and that standard that you've established, I think that'll help your child to be able to learn. So, without boundaries, my kids do not know what is expected. It's much harder for them to figure out what's beneficial versus destructive when there are just, no boundaries at all, which is why, corporal punishment has its places. I experienced that myself growing up, and I think the thing is that it is very much a deterrent. It can be used as a deterrent to, crossing boundaries, but just remember to keep the boundaries, healthy. If it's too, restrictive, it can be, very traumatizing for a child. But if it's done, in a loving manner and done, where that the child clearly knows that if they do this, this is the consequence, then I think, whatever the consequence could be, right, that it could be done in a loving way. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that part. Moving on to Proverbs chapter 14, it's verse number 10. "The heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy." Now, I have to admit, I'm a little bit confused by this, right? This seems like something I'd love to have, King Solomon or the writer be able to unpack a little bit more and discuss and say a little bit more about what is going on in his mind when he's speaking this. But my takeaway from it is that your emotions are experienced mainly internally. So as I talked about at the first part, the self-awareness and self-love, self-gratitude is very helpful here. So I encourage you to let go of any bitterness you might have, the things that eat away at you, like regret, envy, hatred, and gratitude. I know it's hard. I know earlier I talked about the things I regret saying to my wife as well, but over time you learn that that's a part of your story now, that you can't change the past, but you can change the future, and you can especially change how you view the past. and to say that if somebody slighted you, to let go of it and to acknowledge that you may just not want to put yourself in a situation like that again. When you feel ungrateful for what you have, take inventory of what you do have. Your life, yourself, your body, your relationships. And to say that the past does not have to define the future for you. Also, along with this, the other side of that is just to seek joy within your heart. The things that bring you life, when you have self-agency and feel fulfilled, when you're in community and connected, when you have self-empathy, and when you see yourself as a beloved being, especially as a beloved child of God with whom God is well pleased. I think that is the sentiments of verse 10. So, closing it in verse 15, I leave you with this thought: the simple believe everything, but the clever consider their steps. So, as a pastor, try and articulate, often that life is more than just black and white, good and evil, right? We are called to reflect on our actions in order to adapt and grow from them, to learn and to grow for the future. That we can learn from our steps and missteps and change what we do for the future. So I hope as you are journeying, as you are on this journey of life, as you are trying to seek wisdom from all sources, and may the Proverbs speak to you wisdom, insight, guidance, and may you know that you're beloved by God, and also that you are still growing and within yourself still being matured. So may you know that I appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're listening to this. Thanks for giving me your time and your ear here today for the Daily Bread Bible Study.